My name is Maria Rocque Madrid. I was born in Igloo, South Dakota, in the Black Hills, western South Dakota. And my parents brought me to introduce me to their grandparents when I was a couple of weeks old. And they left back without a kid. My grandparents said, "This is our kid now, and we're going to raise him." So they did. They adopted me, and I was raised by them. As a kid, my family owned 1,600 head of sheep. 400 from my Uncle Bert, 400 from my grandma, and 400 from my grandpa, and 400 for the sheep herders. So the sheep herders got 25% of whatever was sent to market in the fall. And the rest was divided equally between the three adults. And I used to go with them to take the sheep up to the mountains in the early spring and then ride up horseback again to bring them back in the late fall. I remember going up to La Sierra, and there was a guy by the name of Medardo Sanchez who had a miniature sawmill. I mean, a home put together operation. And I think he and his family would cut in the neighborhood of 3-4 dozen trees a year. And that's what they made into lumber. We used to buy all of our lumber from them for making corrals and things like that. So they harvested, like I said, in the neighborhood of for everybody, total 4 or 5 dozen trees a year. And we would go up there and gather food, berries, oregano, other kinds of pinon nuts, every kind of thing you can think of. Never went hunting, but our sheep herder would sometimes kill a deer or a bear that got in the head of the sheep. And it happened very rarely. I think he killed one bear in his whole life and a couple of deer. And so La Sierra to me was a different thing when it was owned by all the people, when it was a land grant that everybody used cooperatively, everybody worked it together, and there were no conflicts amongst the neighbors and the users of La Sierra. Everybody was always having a good time while going up there. We went up there to gather firewood, and I never went fishing or hunting, and neither did my family. For whatever reason, they didn't do that. Bringing that closer to date now, later on, La Sierra was sold to a lumberjack from New Bern, North Carolina, by the name of Jack Taylor. For I believe it was like $7.50 an acre, if I'm not mistaken. And that money disappeared real quick. Don't ask me who took it. You have to research that for yourself. But it disappeared. It didn't go into the county coffers. We would go up there, do our work with the sheep, bring them back down in the fall. In the winter, I was 4 or 5 years old. I would go to the corrals with my grandfather. And there would be ice 4-5 feet thick in the ponds, and I was afraid to go through there, so they had to carry me across the ice and into the corral. When we got into the corrals, they were insulated with a straw that was left from the thrashing of the wheat, barley, oats, and as they were thrashing it, the straw was being shipped to the tops of the corrals, and then it fell to the sides where there were fences and orillos, or edgings of the trees that were made into lumber. And even though it was way below zero when we went up there in the winter, as soon as we went inside that corral, I had to strip myself down to a t-shirt and barefoot because it was so hot inside those corrals. The sheep were not crammed in there, but they were close enough together that the pens were maybe 5 by 5 or something for each sheep that was going to have a baby. My grandfather would go every night and every day, and he'd check the sheep individually to see which ones were going to have their babies. He knew how to tell that. I didn't. I was still too little to know that. So he would put them, when they were going to deliver, put them in their own pen. And then it was our responsibility to raise those sheep that their mothers, for whatever reason, wouldn't raise them, whether they couldn't produce milk or whatever the reason was, they didn't. We called them pencos. And we would bottle feed those with cow milk. And our job, the kids' job, the 4 of us, was to feed the pencos. And we loved doing it because those guys were like puppies. Everywhere that we went, the pencos were right behind us. So when they were going to take them to market in the fall, the 4 hobbits would get up at 4 in the morning or something, 2 in the morning before our parents got up, and we would just call the sheep by name, and they'd come running after us because they'd probably be following us for a bottle. And we'd take them and hide them about half a mile from the house in the pasture called La Vega. And so when they were counting them to load them on the semis, they would say, we're missing 14 sheep. There was 14 more here last night than there are today. Where are they? And they would count them again, and finally say, how many sheep did the kids raise? 14. They'd pull out their binoculars and look at the meadow and say, we can't hold the semis that long, so we're going to leave those behind. We kept the pencos for the family. Eventually they became breeding sheep and for shearing and things. And so we used La Sierra with other neighbors and residents of the area. We weren't the only ones grazing up there. I mean, there were tons of people grazing up there. And bringing firewood, we would bring our firewood in small loads, sometimes pulled by 2 horses in a wagon, and bring our firewood. When we would go take food up to the sheep herder, we'd bring firewood on the way back with the horses. Later on in the years, that mountain got sold to that infamous Jack Taylor, and at that point he fenced it. Some people went up there to look for a missing steer or something, and he and his goons assaulted him so bad that they threw him on the back of a truck and brought him to the sheriff's office, wanting the sheriff to throw him in jail. The sheriff ended up throwing that man in jail instead and sending those people to medical care. And they were badly injured by Jack Taylor and his goons. Somebody was going to kill him, but they were aiming a 30-30 rifle at him, but another neighbor jumped up and he said, no, man. He said, the guy ain't worth killing. You know, you're going to go to prison if you get caught doing it. So they pulled the rifle away from the guy that was going to kill him. Be that as it may, the guy survived and fenced off La Sierra. And his process for harvesting lumber is he would buy, let's say, a 100,000 acre tract. And then he would lumber that 100,000 acres and increase that 100,000 to 200,000 by creeping into the neighboring land. He would go 20,000 here, 20,000 there, 20,000 all around, and all of a sudden he would be harvesting wood from people that hadn't sold it to him. He would just take their wood and say, oh, I thought this was my property, and steal adjoining lumber from adjoining properties. They started logging it very seriously in the early 70s. And they did so much damage. The way people did it before, it was a rainforest is what it was actually. The watershed was like a rainforest. It was so thick with trees. People would harvest maybe 4 dozen a year for Christmas for 4 dozen families. I'm just guessing at the number, about that. And after they harvested those 4 dozen, 5 dozen trees, then they brought only dried dead wood that was just dead on the ground. They would bring that for firewood. And we would bring that back with horses. After Jack Taylor came into San Luis, he did the same thing here. He started raping the land, not harvesting. There are 2 ways of cutting land. You can either clean it up, which is what he did, or you can do thinning of the forest, which is collective of taking just the dead standings, bringing them down, using them for lumber, and leaving the green ones there so that they'll produce a shade. That's a canopy that prevents the sun from hitting the snow and melting in March and April instead of July and August. So he raided the La Sierra, stripped it of the undergrowth. He wasn't the only land rapist. There was another family of land rapists that succeeded him. When he logged La Sierra and we saw what was going on, environmentalists got together. We had a local engineer who designed a lock cattle guard that he designed it, made out of steel, and local iron workers put it together to his design. And some of us ended up chaining ourselves to that cattle guard, or other people chained themselves to a car that was put in with what we called an elephant, buried into the ground, a cement block buried into the ground. So they couldn't take us out of there. No matter how they tried to get us out, they couldn't without hurting us. The loggers would show up, the logging trucks would show up in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, and say, you can come in here, sir. There's somebody locked onto the cattle guard. Okay, you guys have a good day, and the loggers would take off. It got bad enough that people started uniting behind that issue and bringing this to a front. So we stopped the logging, Taylor's logging. But then 20 years later, those trees are now 10, 20 feet tall, the ones that grew back from the previous logging, and local thieves went up there and cut them or dug them up with the roots to go and sell them at the ski resorts. Those were local thieves, not North Carolina people. They've done as much damage to La Sierra as the loggers ever did, or more. Tree for tree, these tree thieves have taken more trees than the loggers ever did. So they've done some serious damage to La Sierra. The Land Rights Council was charged with taking responsibility for bringing that to an end, which the Land Rights Council and the community organizing behind the Land Rights Council brought it to a halt. We haven't seen any people hauling pickup loads or trailer loads of trees to replant in Aspen or elsewhere in the ski resorts. So it took the community to bring that to a head, and I was threatened by one of the members of that family, and we were having a meeting and with the owner, the new owner of La Sierra, who's William Harrison. And this family member whispers to me so that the rest of the board wouldn't hear it, and he said, "Don't go talk about the green." I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "That's all I talk about is the green. I have nothing else to talk about." And so he just bowed his head and didn't say anything more. Well, later on, both myself and other people involved in it have been not threatened, but intimidated by the people that were getting that. They showed me rolls of $100 bills that thick to try to get me to take some of their money to keep my mouth shut, which of course I refused. Now the community is so well united behind stopping all the tree thieving, and hopefully, not in our lifetime, but hopefully in our grandchildren's time, we will have another rainforest there again like the one that existed before. The community does not want to stop local people from going up there and gathering firewood, which the courts granted us two things: gathering firewood and bringing lumber for building corrals, trees for building corrals. So people are respecting that and not using them to exploit the mountain, except for, like I said, that family of thieves. But other than that, it's not happening anymore. We've pretty much united. The community, when I say we, I'm talking about all of us that live here, have united behind organizing and telling the people, listen, if you see somebody with a load of trees with burlap sacks on the roots, we want to know about it. So now the Colorado State Patrol, the County Sheriff's Department know about this, and apparently the people are stopping it. It's not happening anymore, as far as we know. Now, we don't have a way of monitoring them around the clock. We're working on doing that. But as far as we know, we haven't seen it like we were seeing it before. It was horrifying. Every day you'd see somebody pulling a truckload full of trees to replant wherever the rich people lived. The new owners are not interested in logging, but they're doing something with La Sierra that we're kind of a little upset about. They're stopping people from going up there to get meat or fish. And a lot of people would feed their families by bringing an elk or a couple of deer or something for the winter to feed their families, or fish for a week or something. They put it in the freezer and have food. This guy is only allowing people that have big bucks. He flies them in from Taos on a helicopter straight to La Sierra. And then I don't know what the fees are, but he charges them a lot of money in order for him to fly them on a helicopter out of Taos and take them back, lodge them and everything while they're there. He's making a lot of money. We don't care. We don't care that he's making money doing that. We do care about the environment. We do care that he doesn't destroy La Sierra like the Taylors did. The first year that we protested in New Bern, North Carolina, we made friends with the chief of police and the fire department. We, the environmentalists, went from here to protest up there. So 2 years after the first protest, we went back, and our friends from the fire department that we had made earlier and the chief of police came to greet us. We were staying in a park, camping out in a park. And they showed up with 47 barbecued chickens. It turned out that all of us were vegetarians. So we apologized, and they said, hey, no problem. We got a big fire department. We'll feed the fire department barbecued chicken. So we camped out there in North Carolina and protested. And I was walking up in the courthouse, walking up to look for the chief of police. And there was two city police officer and a county sheriff walking down the stairs as I was walking up. I said, excuse me, officers, can you direct me to the chief of police? And they looked at each other, and one of them made a comment about, that's one of those hippie demonstrators that are down here harassing Mr. Taylor. And I said, well, I said, if you don't want to talk to me, I said, I don't want to talk to you either. You guys have a great day. And I kept walking up, and sure enough, the chief of police came up. We talked to him. He said, well, guys, look. And he threw a paper at us to look. And this was the neighborhood where the Taylors lived. And they passed a ruling that was probably illegal anyway, but they said you couldn't protest or demonstrate in this community of blocked-in community. So we sat down to brainstorm that, no protesting, huh? No demonstrating? So we started working with words. I said, well, we won't demonstrate and we won't protest. Could we have a parade? And they said, well, that's not on the order, so yeah, I guess you guys could have a parade. We had our parade. And Zach Taylor was not happy about the parade, other were his children. But we pulled it off. And he got enough heat that he sold it to another person who sold it to another, who sold it to another, and down the line. And now a guy by the name of William Harrison owns La Sierra. But at least the guy is courteous enough to talk to the community at community meetings. He doesn't come with a whole bunch of bodyguards. Taylor would come up to San Luis, and there were people sitting on top of the shrine in the south end of town, the west end of town, and aiming with scopes at the people going into the courthouse to listen to the hearings, where Jack Taylor showed up with 24 bodyguards, all of them armed with 30-06s and camped all around the place. This new owner doesn't do that. He drives in by himself without a chauffeur, without a bodyguard or nothing. We respect that a lot more. People that know that we're not a violent community. We never have been. We never hurt any of their people, not physically. We hurt them in the pocketbook because that's the only way that you can bring this kind of capitalist pigs down. As hurting them in the pocketbook. You can't hurt them any other way. At least environmentalists will not hurt them any other way. Our rule is we don't create any blood drops anywhere with nothing, with people or animals or nothing. That we follow that rule to the T. With that in mind, the new owner then comes and we've had, I believe, 3, maybe 4 meetings with him here in San Luis. As a matter of fact, in the same building. And he made us an offer that had been offered to us before. He said, here's 10,800 acres, and I'll give you guys those 10,800 acres plus $5 million escrow if you guys will let me have the rest of La Sierra without any problems so that I can own it all by myself. And we said, we've had that offer made to us before. We turned it down then, and we're turning it down now. We're not interested in owning 10,800 acres of barren land, because that's what he offered. It was just 10,000 acres of where nothing grows. So even if he had offered us half of La Sierra, we would have still refused it just on general principles. We either all or nothing. We want it all. We want the rights to fish and hunt, and the court should recognize that. In those days, we didn't call it recreation, except for one day a year, the 4th of July, everybody would get together and go up to La Sierra and camp out and fish, have a party, and then come down, but we wouldn't destroy it. We lived in harmony with the environment. After that, people started seeing that they could make a lot of money going up there and not doing it at night. They would sneak up there in the dark and then come back in the middle of the night with their loads of trees to take and sell them in Aspen and Evergreen and all the other ski resorts in the area. I've been threatened and intimidated by those people. Threatened, I don't know about intimidated. I think that's the wrong word. I'm not intimidated by them. They're going to have to punch me in the face to intimidate me. And if they do that, then what goes around comes around. I don't know what they've done to the rest of the community. Nobody talks about that because nobody wants any violence. The whole community we're united behind nonviolence. And so this new owner understands that, and he shows up, like I said, unarmed and without bodyguards, an army of people. So we're trying to work with him to the point that we hope that someday we will be able to re-race all that logging that was destroyed so that our grandchildren or great-grandchildren down the road will have another nice canopy up there so that they can irrigate the farms that come all the way from San Francisco and Chama area on the east, and water goes all the way west to San Acaso and Mesita. Well, now the priority of water rights goes to the first people that applied for them. So San Acaso, which is at the far end of the water coming off La Sierra has the first priority to irrigate. The people closer to La Sierra have the lower priorities. And I think that's kind of a messed up thing, but tells that to a farmer that you want to change his water, and that's enough to get shot for. You don't tell any farmer that you want to change the rules about how they do the water distribution. They have that already organized, and they're happy taking their animals up there and having water to irrigate their farmlands, and to tell them that, hey, maybe we could change that a little bit, and if we allow people in Chama and San Francisco and further east coming right off La Sierra to irrigate first, maybe some of that water would percolate to the lower ends, and then in San Acacio it would resurface again and everybody would be able to irrigate. As it stands now, there's only enough water for the people with the first priority, which is in San Acacio. And people sometimes, it makes me real sad to see the people in San Francisco and Chama that used to plant gardens to feed their family, not even planting a year of corn. Maybe 3-4 different things that they can irrigate with their house wells, nothing with the water that comes off La Sierra, because there isn't enough water coming. And I'm one of the people that's blessed with having inherited from my grandparents land that has the first priority in irrigation. And my neighbors are the same way, and they're good neighbors. Robert Quintana's a heck of a good neighbor and a good friend. But I would never dream of telling Robert Quintana that, hey, bud, why don't we think about allowing the people in San Francisco and Chama to irrigate before us? Because that would be enough to make me relocate somewhere else, out of state. But they're good people. They're good neighbors. I wouldn't trade those neighbors for anybody in the world. They're really honest, hardworking farmers, ranchers. And I hope that someday this new owner, Harrison, will recognize that we are united behind our issue to stop the deforestation up there and allowing people to go beyond just grazing and bringing firewood, but allow people to go up there and bring deer or elk or fish for food, not for sport. Local people never had a license, never went up there for sport. They went up there to feed their families. And I remember our family would hang the strips of elk and deer on the clothesline to dry them up into jerky to have meat during the winter. So nothing went to waste. The hides were used to make tents and things. The meat was used for feeding, and La Serra was used for grazing. And like I said, maybe 5 dozen trees a year were logged. And these people that did it would cut them down in the summer when it was nice and warm up there and there wasn't a bunch of snow. And then in the winter, they'd pull them down with horses, one tree at a time. That's how they did their logging. They'd bring them down with a bunch of horses pulling one log at a time. And then the whole family would put the log through the sawmill and make it into however many pieces they made it into, and they'd get it ordered. The kids would go out and fish all day long to feed the people that were buying the lumber in the end of the day. They'd feed us fish. And I still remember those people, and I have a warm spot in my heart for their families. They were really nice people, and they still are. Their genealogy is still here. And we are very good friends with that genealogy because they made a living, but they didn't rape the land. There's a difference between using and abusing. And they used the land, but they never abused it. The later owners have abused it and not used it, just abused it. Their herds are so large now that our concern is that if they get too large, there's not going to be enough foliage for the animals, the wildlife to eat, let alone to graze. Not only that, if there's not enough foliage for the wildlife, then the wildlife will suffer. They will have biological illnesses as a result of not having enough nutrition. So we're concerned that he should allow local people to go up there and gather their food for the winter, an elk or two maybe, or a couple of deer per family to feed them in the winter, and reduce the herds to a sustainable amount. Because right now, people go up there and they shoot them and they take the antlers and the heads and hang it up as a trophy, and hopefully they're letting the people bring the meat down for at least to give it away to the schools or to home services or whatever, but not letting it go to waste. And so we're concerned about what happened in the past, but we're optimistic about what's going to happen.